This is an audiobook created by Subconscious Key Studio. Close your eyes for a moment. Just listen to that sound. It's a reed flute, a neigh. In the tradition we're about to explore, this isn't just an instrument. It is the sound of the human soul. It's said that when the reed is cut from its bed in the riverbank, it sings a song of separation, a lament for the home it has lost. It wails for the source from which it was torn. Have you ever felt that? A longing for something you can't quite name, a homesickness for a place you've never visited, a feeling that just beneath the surface of your busy life, your to-do lists, your responsibilities, your screens, there is a deeper, more vibrant, more real world calling to you. This feeling, this divine discontent, is the starting point of every great spiritual journey. And tonight, for the next hour, we are going to follow that sound back to its source. We are going to trace the path of one man who felt this longing so acutely that it shattered his world, and in doing so, remade him into one of the most beloved poets and mystics the world has ever known. This is not just a history lesson. This is the story of Jalaluddin Rumi, a scholar, a father, a pillar of his community who, at the age of 37, had his entire existence upended by a wild, wandering dervish. It's a story of devastating loss, ecstatic union, and the timeless, practical wisdom that emerged from the crucible of a broken heart. This is the story of how grief can become a gateway to grace. To understand the miracle of Rumi's transformation, we must first understand the man he was before it. Imagine him not as a mythical poet, but as a man. A real human being with worries and routines. It is the 13th century, around the year 1244. The place is Konya, a bustling, sun-baked city in Anatolia, in what is now modern Turkey. Konya was a cultural crossroads, a place where East met West. It was a city of caravanserais, where silk and spice traders from across the world would stop and share stories. But it was also a city living under a shadow. To the east, the Mongol hordes were sweeping across Asia, leaving destroyed cities and shattered empires in their wake. There was a pervasive feeling of impermanence, a sense that the solid structures of civilization could be swept away in an instant. And into this uncertain world, Jalaluddin Rumi was born into a line of scholars and theologians. His family were refugees themselves, fleeing the Mongol advance. They understood instability. Perhaps that's why, when they settled in Konya, Rumi dedicated himself to the pillars of order and certainty. He became a renowned Islamic jurist, a professor, a theologian. He was given the title Maulana, our master. People would come to him to settle disputes, to understand complex points of law, to seek his blessing. Picture him, a man in his late 30s, dressed in the fine robes of a scholar. He is married, a father. His days are filled with lectures in the madrasa, debates with other scholars, leading prayers at the mosque. He is respected, even revered. His life is a monument to knowledge, to discipline, to doing things the right way. He was, by all accounts, a good man, a successful man, but was he a fulfilled man? We can't know for sure, but the poetry that would later erupt from him gives us a clue. It speaks of a thirst that academic knowledge couldn't quench, a hunger that ritual and rule following couldn't satisfy. You might know this feeling yourself. You've achieved what you thought you wanted, the degree, the job, the relationship. And yet there's a quiet voice inside that whispers, "Is this all there is?" This is the voice of the mystic. This is the sound of the ney, the reed flute, remembering the reed bed. Rumi's father was a mystic, a Sufi, and he'd planted seeds in his son. Sufism is the mystical, inner dimension of Islam. It's less about the law and more about the spirit. It's the path of the heart. While Rumi was a master of the law, his heart was secretly yearning for the direct, experiential taste of the divine. He was like a man who had read every book ever written about the taste of honey, but had never once put it on his tongue. He had spiritual teachers, of course. One in particular, a man named Barhan-ud-Din, had been a student of his father's. For 9 years, Barhan-ud-Din guided Rumi through the initial stages of Sufi practice: prayer, fasting, self-discipline. It was a good and important foundation. It was like building a beautiful, pristine, and empty cup. The cup was ready, but it was waiting for the wine. And as fate would have it, the wine was on its way. In the bazaars and coffee houses of Konya, whispers began to circulate. Whispers of a strange, wild-looking dervish who had arrived in the city. His name was Shams of Tabriz. Shams means the sun. The stories about him were outrageous. He was a calendar, a type of wandering mystic who deliberately flouted social conventions. He wasn't interested in mosques or madrasas. He would sleep in ruins, talk to outcasts, and confront the wealthy and powerful with shocking, unsettling questions. His eyes, it was said, burned like coals. He was ragged, sun-blackened, and utterly free. He was everything the respectable, scholarly Rumi was not. And Shams, it was said, was looking for someone. A companion, a mirror. He would often pray, "O God, to be shown one of your fully realized beings." He was searching for a student who was not just knowledgeable, but who had the capacity to contain an ocean of divine love. What must Rumi have thought of these rumors? If he heard them at all, he likely dismissed them. A respectable professor doesn't have time for wild-eyed vagabonds. His life was ordered, predictable, and secure. But the universe, it seems, had other plans. The cup was about to meet the wine. The reed was about to meet its breath. So let's pause here for a moment in this calm before the storm. See Rumi in his study, surrounded by his books, the ink drying on a legal opinion. The afternoon light slants through the window. It is a life of meaning and purpose by any standard. It is a life many of us would envy. But the deepest transformations, the ones that change us and through us, change the world, never come from a place of comfort. They come from a confrontation. They come when a force of nature enters our neatly ordered world and asks us a question we've been afraid to ask ourselves. The meeting between Rumi and Shams is one of the most famous encounters in the history of spirituality. It wasn't a polite meeting of minds. It was a collision of two worlds, and it would begin with a single, devastating question. The story goes that Rumi was riding through the streets of Konya on his donkey, surrounded by his students, a symbol of his status and learning. And there, blocking his path, stood the ragged figure of Shams of Tabriz. Shams didn't bow. He didn't offer a respectful greeting. Instead, he strode forward, grabbed the bridle of Rumi's donkey, and looked the great scholar directly in the eye. "Maulana," he said, his voice cutting through the chatter of the students, "I have a question for you. Who was the greater spiritual figure, the Prophet Muhammad or the Sufi mystic Bastami?" Now to the students, this was blasphemy. The Prophet Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, the highest of God's messengers. Bastami was a great mystic, but to compare him to the prophet, it was unthinkable. It was a trap. But Rumi, being a scholar, gave a scholarly answer. He began to explain the different roles of the prophet and the saint, the legalist and the mystic. Shams didn't let him finish. He asked again, but who was greater? Rumi, perhaps slightly irritated, gave a more detailed theological answer, explaining the supremacy of the prophet. And then Shams asked a third time, who was greater? And in that moment, something shifted. Rumi saw that this was not a theological exam. This was a sword aimed directly at the core of his identity. His entire life was built upon knowing the right answers. Shams was asking him to look beyond knowledge to a truth that cannot be found in books. And then, the story goes, Shams provided his own answer. He said, Bastami said, "I am the Supreme. I am God." But the Prophet Muhammad, in his utter humility, said, "I cannot praise you as you deserve. I cannot know you fully." So Muhammad's awareness of the infinite mystery of God was so vast that it kept him in a state of perpetual humility. Therefore, Muhammad was greater. In that instant, the ground fell away from beneath Rumi's feet. His intellectual understanding was incinerated by a flash of direct insight. He saw that all his knowledge was just a map, and Shams was pointing to the actual territory. He was dumbstruck. He slid from his donkey, and right there in the street, the two men embraced, lost in a state of spiritual ecstasy. The professor and the wild dervish, the cup and the wine, the reunion had begun. What followed was a scandal. Rumi and Shams withdrew from the world. For months, they shut themselves away in a small cell. They engaged in sobit, which is more than conversation. It's a spiritual communion, a mutual polishing of souls. Rumi abandoned his lectures. He ignored his students. He was absent from his family. The man who was the pillar of the community was now lost in a divine intoxication. The stories say they didn't even eat proper meals. Rumi's son, Sultan Walid, would bring them food and find them spinning in ecstatic prayer or sitting in profound silence. Can you imagine the gossip in the city? Maulana has lost his mind. That sorcerer has bewitched him. And can you feel the jealousy and fear of his students? Their teacher, their source of status and income, had been stolen by a madman. Their world was being overturned. And what about Rumi's own internal struggle? He was a man of duty. He must have felt the pull of his responsibilities, the confusion of his family, the accusations of his peers. This is the human pain, the doubt. He was being torn in two. The safe, respectable life he had built was on one side, and on the other was this overwhelming, all-consuming experience of love. A love so profound it felt like the only real thing in the universe. This was his crucible, his great struggle. The pressure became too much. The hostility from Rumi's family and students grew so intense that Shams, without a word, disappeared. He simply vanished from Konya. Now, Rumi's real descent into the crucible began. If the initial meeting was an ecstatic earthquake, Shams's disappearance was the long, cold, dark night of the soul. Rumi was devastated. He had tasted the wine of union, and now he was brutally sober, hungover, and alone. The beloved was gone. He stopped composing legal treatises and began writing love poems. But they weren't poems of happy romance. They were cries of anguish. They were the songs of the nay. He would wander the streets, composing lines of poetry, weeping uncontrollably. He traveled to Damascus, searching for Shams, asking everyone he met if they had seen his beloved. Listen to the raw human pain in these lines, written during this period. I am so small I can barely be seen. How can this great love be inside me? Look at your eyes. They are small, but they see enormous things. He wasn't a mystic on a high mountain. He was a heartbroken man in the dust, trying to understand how his small human heart could contain such an immense, unbearable love. This is the first crucial lesson from Rumi's struggle. The depth of your grief is a measure of the depth of your love. Don't run from your heartbreak. It is a holy place. After more than a year, Rumi's son, Sultan Walid, seeing his father unbearable suffering, tracked Shams down in Damascus and begged him to return. The reunion was joyous, but the shadow of the community's jealousy remained, now darker and more dangerous than ever. The final act of the struggle was brutal and swift. One night, while Rumi and Shams were deep in conversation, a group of assailants, likely led by Rumi's own younger son, Jalaluddin and other disgruntled followers came to the door. They called for Shams. Shams, sensing his fate, reportedly said to Rumi, "This time they will kill me." He went to the door, and he was never seen again. Most historians believe he was murdered. The story says that when Rumi rushed to the door, he found only a few drops of blood in the courtyard. His beloved, his son, was gone forever. This was the bottom of the crucible. This was the moment of absolute annihilation. Rumi had lost everything. His old identity as a scholar was gone. His new identity as a companion of the divine was shattered. He searched for Shams's body for years, even traveling again to Damascus. But he never found him. And it was in this total, complete, and utter devastation that the final alchemical transformation occurred. Rumi stopped searching for Shams out there. He turned inward, and in the silent, shattered space of his own heart, he made the most profound discovery. He realized that the beloved he had been seeking in the form of Shams was not outside of him. Shams had been a mirror, reflecting back the divine beloved that had always been living within Rumi's own soul. The friend was not gone. The friend had just moved house from an external form to the internal essence. The wine was the same. The cup had simply been broken, allowing him to realize he was not the cup, but the ocean itself. And now the poetry exploded. It was no longer just about longing, it was about union. He stopped writing in his own name and began signing his poems Shams, or Shams of Tabriz. He had become so united with his beloved that their identities merged. This is the state he points to in his work. Let's sit with a few of these lines, not as philosophy, but as direct transmissions of experience. First, this famous line, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." We often read this as a nice, inspirational quote, but feel the context now. The wound was the murder of his best friend. The wound was the betrayal by his own family. The wound was the utter destruction of his life. He is not saying, get a wound so the light can come in. He is saying that when life inevitably gives you a wound, a loss, a failure, a betrayal, don't let it scab over with bitterness. Keep it open, be vulnerable. Because that crack in your armor, that broken open quality of your heart, is the only way the light of consciousness, of compassion, of true understanding can get in. Your greatest vulnerability is your greatest spiritual opportunity. Another one, don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form. This is not a spiritual bypass. It's not him saying, cheer up, it's all for the best. It's a statement of cosmic law. He lost Shams, the man. And what came round in another form was 60,000 verses of the most sublime poetry in human history. He lost a teacher and gained his own divine voice. What have you lost? A job, a dream, a relationship. The invitation here is to look not at the closed door, but at the new hallway that might be opening. What new form is your loss preparing to take? It requires a deep, patient trust in the unfolding of the universe. And finally, this beautiful invitation. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. This is the ultimate fruit of his transformation. The scholar, the jurist, the man of right-doing, was taken by Shams to a place beyond all judgment. This field is a state of consciousness. It's the space you access when you stop labeling everything in your life as good or bad, success or failure. It's the inner freedom that comes when you stop listening to the critical voice in your head that is constantly judging you and everyone else. Rumi is asking us to meet him in that field of pure, non-judgmental awareness. It is the home we have been longing for. So how do we, you and I, sitting in our world of traffic jams and digital notifications, apply this 13th century love story? How do we make it practical? First, see your shams. Your shams is not necessarily a person. Your shams is anything or anyone that shatters your comfortable illusions. It's the difficult coworker who triggers your anger. It's the sudden illness that stops you in your tracks. It's the project that fails spectacularly. These are not random misfortunes. They are your personal shams of Tabriz, asking you the uncomfortable question that can break you open. The next time you face a great difficulty, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking, "What part of me is this trying to break open? What illusion is this shattering?" Second, honor the wound. We live in a culture that tells us to get over it and be strong. Rumi invites us to be tender with our broken places. When you feel heartache, grief, or shame, don't immediately reach for your phone or a drink to numb it. Sit with it for just 5 minutes. Breathe into it. Ask the wound what it has to teach you. Treat your heartbreak as a sacred text. Third, visit the field. Every day, find a few moments to go beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing. This is meditation. This is a walk in nature without your headphones. This is sitting and just listening to the sounds around you without labeling them. This is the practice of dropping the constant, exhausting commentary of the mind and resting in the pure isness of life. This is where you meet your true self. And finally, become the nay. Stop trying to be so solid, so defended, so in control. The reed flute is powerful precisely because it is hollow. It is empty of self, so it can be filled with breath and become a vehicle for beautiful music. Your task is not to build a more impressive ego. Your task is to become hollow, open, and receptive, so that the breath of life can move through you and make its own unique music. The story of Rumi and Shams is, in the end, the story of every human soul. It is the journey from the head to the heart, from knowing about God to knowing God, from being a respectable, well-defended fortress to being a broken open, love-soaked ruin, from which a garden of poetry and compassion endlessly blooms. We end where we began, with the sound of the neigh. But listen to it now with new ears. It is no longer just a song of sadness. It is a song of joyful remembrance. It is the sound of your own soul calling you home. And so we leave you with Rumi's final, timeless whisper, a secret passed from his heart to yours. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop.